Okay, there we go.
Oh, it's starting.
Yeah, now people can join.
Hello.
Theoretically.
Hello.
Okay, so y'all started the webinar, which is fine, but that means attendees they're hopping in now. So
Yay. Hello.
thanks. Sorry, I was on mute because I'm working on another session at the moment.
No, it's fine.
No, I'm
But
sorry.
if you need anything, oh no, don't apologize. Just shoot me a chat.
Will do.
Okay, will do. Hello, friends. Oh, wow.
Hello.
People are filtering in.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Hello, everyone. I'm gonna give people a few minutes to come in.
Yep.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hello. Saludos.
Just to want to let people know that we will have hopefully time for questions at the end. So please feel free to throw those in the Q&A section. You should have a little button at the bottom of the screen of like Whova. It'll say Q&A. You should be able to click on that and add questions if you would like. We have a few from Whova that we will also be discussing.
Yeah.
So
it's at the bottom of the Zoom window.
yeah.
Hopefully we'll have enough time because we've only got an hour. Cool.
Yeah.
I'll give people maybe like 1 or 2 more minutes, but we got a pretty solid group coming in here already. So hi, everybody.
Yeah.
I will share my screen now.
Okay.
Yeah. Liking the Kirby's. Thank you. I have my, this is my streaming setup. So I have all of my video game accoutrement in the background as well as posters and whatnot. All right. Let's see here. We're going to do. There. Is it working?
It is working. Looks really good.
Excellent. And you can still see just that, right?
It's like you and me and that. So
yeah. Awesome. I can't see anybody else's chatting, which is kind of a bummer. I want to see chat. Where's chat? Oh, okay. I haven't. All right. I fixed it.
Hello.
Hi, Amy. How are you? Would it be possible to receive a copy of the slides?
Can certainly add that somewhere.
Would we do this before or after?
Let's do it afterwards, if that's cool.
Yeah, we can. I think we can share that. If you email it to me, I can upload to Whova, send in PDF form. Oh, okay, cool. Well, then give me a second. Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
Can I stop? Okay, stop share. There we go. Okay. Hold on. What if
you're in the right place? We're just making things complicated.
File, download, PDF document. Oh, okay, cool. Save as. Yeah. Cool. And then I will go ahead. Hop into the thing. And we'll do that and then we can get started.
Hello. Yeah. Good. Okay, there we
go. 1 and 2 and a 3.
Okay. And just
boom.
Welcome again. This is like the invisible Asexuality, Aromanticism, and Christian Culture breakout session. We're really excited for everybody that's here. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A link that should be at the bottom of your Zoom. Yeah, we're gonna get started here in like a hot minute.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good to start whenever you are.
Okay. Yeah, so
I'm Alan. This is Vaughn.
I'm Vaughn. And this is our 3rd QCF. And our first time doing a breakout session.
Yeah.
And
it's exciting.
Yeah. And we're really excited to talk to you about aromanticism and asexuality, whether you are asexual or aromantic, wondering if you are, or if you know somebody who is, or if you're just wondering what it's all about. Hopefully we will cover a little bit of everything here for you. Mm-hmm. So that is where we're going to start. Mm-hmm. I have closed up the thing that I need to look at.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want
me
to
it's fine. Yes.
Before we get started talking about the invisibility of asexuality and aromanticism within Christianity, we would be remiss to not point out the other invisibilities that exist within our various communities.
Yeah, so in that vein, because we hail from the United States, we would like to begin by acknowledging the original owners of the land on which we currently live. We live on the land of the Lenape tribe. Acknowledgement is just one of the first steps towards decolonization and land back. And we are both, that's something that we're both very passionate about working on, but we are both taking just starting steps on this. And we wanted to, and we still have a lot of room for improvement, but we'd like to point out to you the website of the Nanticoke Lenape tribal nation, because they have penned a message of their own for us to share in giving acknowledgement of their land.
I have dropped a link to their website in the chat.
Thank you. I'm going to read that to you, and I apologize. I've done my best with the pronunciation. We did some reading of it to try and get it right, but I may mess up. We're not perfect. It's okay. It's a step. This land is part of the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape called Lenape Hoking. The Lenape people lived in harmony with one another upon this territory for thousands of years. During the colonial era and early federal period, many were moved west and north, but some also remain among the continuing historical tribal communities of the region. The Nanticoke Lenni Lenape tribal nation, the Ramapo Lenape nation, and the Powhatan Lenape nation, the Nanticoke of Millsboro, Delaware, and the Lenape of Cheswold, Delaware. We acknowledge the Lenni Lenape as the original people of this land and their continuing relationship with their territory. In our acknowledgement of the continued presence of Lenape people in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of the great Lenape chief Tamanend, that there may be harmony between the indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land, as long as the rivers and creeks flow and the sun, moon, and stars shine. Just such a gracious message. Thank you.
We also want to thank you guys all for being here, and thank God that we have the opportunity to deliver this talk to you. So yeah. Thank you. You could have picked any other breakout session and you picked ours. That's super cool.
We're very excited to have you.
So formal introductions. My name is Alan, or Al. I use they, them pronouns. I am 32 years old and live in Brooklyn with my partner Vaughn and cat Beans. I've been attending QCF events since 2018. I am asexual, aromantic, and non-binary. And we are super excited to give this talk to you. What about you, hon?
I'm Vaughn. My pronouns are he, they. I know that in the past I've gone by he, him. I am agender, ace, and aro. I call it a triple threat. I'm a AAA battery. And I am 37, and I live with Al and with Beans. And yeah.
We also were both raised in traditional Christian households, within
white
the church.
Evangelical Christian households, to be specific.
Okay. Yeah. And that definitely had an effect on us in I almost forgot the most important thing. This is Beans.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is our beautiful cat.
We put in a particular slide because I'm sure you all wanted to share Beans. Yes, this is Beans. Who is an adorable treasure, and you may hear him scream at some point.
He wants to be where the people are, and we're both in separate rooms talking to you.
With the door closed. That's the real trouble. So both of us growing up in evangelical Christian households had to wrestle with a lot of different aspects about our identities, our queerness, and specifically we want to talk about how that interacts with our identity as aromantic and or asexual people, and as well as what it means to be asexual and aromantic, and sort of like deconstructing those spaces. So let's go ahead and dive right in with the most important question, which is, what does it mean to be asexual and or aromantic?
Yep. The a prefix at the beginning of the words both asexual and aromantic is originally from Greek, and it means without or lacking. So asexual is lacking sexual attraction, aromantic is lacking romantic attraction. Of course, these exist on a spectrum. So we say lacking, but actually this is kind of an umbrella. You can have, there are people that, of course, like they experience some sexual attraction, but not much, or they experience some types of romantic attraction, but not much. We're generally like, it's, when we're comparing ourselves to the general population, like what we hear from other people and their priorities regarding sex or romance, sexual attraction to other people and romance, then we tend to be more like, we tend to feel like, wow, I don't really experience much of that. And that just tends to be what draws people to identify themselves as being on the spectrum of asexuality and or aromanticism. Do want to be clear that this is not necessarily a relationship of like you can be one or the other. You can be just one, not the other, or you can be both. We use the split attraction model. It's called SAM sometimes. It's a distinction between romantic and sexual identity. And of course, this can be problematic because like attraction is very complicated and you cannot really divide it along. Okay, sorry, saw a message, I got curious. You cannot actually divide it along just like romantic and sexual desire. It's very complicated. So sometimes people object to it, but it generally helps when like when you're noticing that you're only experiencing certain aspects of this. Also, sexual attraction is not necessarily a reflection of your sexual practice. Just want to make clear that like you can be somebody who is asexual but still have sex and still enjoy sex, but you don't feel a sexual attraction towards other people. That's what makes it's a lack of attraction. That is what makes the asexuality or the aromanticism. So
to be clear, like when you're using terminology with the split attraction model, an example would be a biromantic asexual, or an aromantic pansexual, or also aromantic asexual, or any combination of those things. It's a way to communicate your romantic identity as distinct from your sexual identity, because those may be different. But there's some mixed feedback about the effectiveness of using the split attraction model. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not, but it's often a way of expressing identity that you'll see within acentric and arocentric communities.
Yeah. So one of the things that you run into is that you'll see people that say like, so examples, as I was saying, you know, of that kind of thing means that you could be somebody who's asexual, but you're heteroromantic, or you're heterosexual, but you're aromantic. And then you get people that say, does that mean that you're still queer? And the answer is yes. Asexuality and aromanticism are both inherently queer identities. I think we have a slide about that.
We do.
Yeah. So
this is still, for some reason, a topic of a hot topic in certain LGBTQ plus circles, where many folks who identify with more traditional, I guess, or binary understandings of sexuality and identity feel as if their space is being taken away from them by people who are, quote unquote, basically straight. And this is an attitude which often gets projected onto asexual and aromantic people because the identity is invisible. If you keep your mouth shut, people assume you are straight until proven otherwise. So why do you have to talk about it? Why do you have to take, quote, resources away from the other members of the community by trying to make something into an identity that is not actually an identity, or it doesn't experience any kind of oppression at all? And that's just wrong, actually. Part of my experience, specifically growing up in the evangelical church, I experienced specific othering and marginalization that I may have been intended as homophobia from the people that gave it to me, but because it was directed at me and I was behaving in adherence with being asexual and being aromantic, and those are my perspectives, it is a phobia. I remember one conversation that I had with my mom when I was growing up. I was about to start 8th grade, and we were just talking in the kitchen. I don't remember what we were talking about or what the subject was, but I said something with this very sort of like, yeah, I'm being a good Christian by saying like, oh, I'm not interested in boys, because of course, as you know, you could only be interested in the opposite gender, of course. And my mom's response was so bizarre. She said, you shouldn't say it that way. People will get the wrong idea. And I'm like, what do you mean people will get the wrong idea? I didn't realize, I think it took me about 30 to 60 seconds thinking about it constantly to realize that she meant that people would think I was gay, which was not the case. I was simply saying I didn't experience attraction to anyone in the way that I knew how. But her immediate response was to assume that I meant I liked girls instead, which also is not the case. We would find out later. In a similar vein, one of the people that I was very close to in my youth group, this is several years down the road, I have always been a very loyal, very openly affectionate friend to people. And apparently the level of physical affection and intimacy that I was pursuing with this particular friend was one that made her uncomfortable, to the point where she said she had had a dream from God about me being a lesbian and that she couldn't be friends with me anymore and that we needed to like be a little bit more distant. And later, she did end up apologizing for that and saying that she was in the wrong there. But for me, that was just so weird because in my head, there was never anything sexual or romantic about the way that I was treating her. I was simply treating her as a friend. But again, her immediate response to my stepping out of the cis heteronormative role about what is assumed about friendship and relational intimacy was all of a sudden I was a homosexual. What? Even though I hadn't really done anything that I recall to indicate of that sort. So you can see these patterns of experience and behavior that were born out of my asexuality, were me engaging with those aspects of my identity. And yeah, we can go to the next slide. And people around me still responding in a way that was negative, and knowing that there was an aspect to my behavior that didn't align with cis heteronormative expectations about who I was supposed to be and who I was. I'm sure a lot of asexuals will identify with the, oh, I don't want to have kids. I don't really feel like I'm going to get married, which was something that I also told my family, my friends. From a very early age, I knew that I didn't really want to have kids, and I had a hard time seeing myself getting married. And then me at 16, 17, 10 years later, communicating this to people around me, I would immediately get oh, you just haven't met the right person. Oh, well, give it time. Oh, well, you don't know what God has for you. And that kind of attitude was just very common. And I've heard a lot of stories from other people who are, who identify on the A spectrum, that they've experienced similarly, that people won't believe them or will dismiss their lack of attraction as just having not experienced it correctly yet. Which we'll get into also like a little bit later on. But all of these experiences are instances of aphobia, where the person who is themselves asexual or aromantic has been othered or deemed abnormal, or is being treated as abnormal by the people in their community or the people that they choose to show aspects of their identity and experience to.
Yeah, everything that Al said. And just adding on just if Al, tell me if I'm repeating you, because but just that cis heteronormativity, essentially it asserts that a person lacks a type of attraction, so therefore they're like if you lack it, you're basically straight, as Al said earlier, I know. Right. But unless it's proven otherwise, which is where a lot of Al's experiences came from. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, inhabitants of cis heteronormative culture notice when people lack that, and that's what happened with Al. And so like
it's like people know that you're not basically straight, And you internally know, like there's a cohesion there of like knowing that there's something about your identity and the way that you see the world that doesn't fit.
Yep. And that's why it's like a queer experience to be asexual or aromantic. And yet at the same time, the fact that we fit into a certain space within purity culture, where up until a certain point, our sexuality is seen as being a good Christian in a lot of spaces that are Puritan, then as a result, that can also separate us from the rest of the LGBTQ culture in terms of how we understand and experience it. So like,
are we moving into that space on the slide? Should I swap, or are we?
No, you're fine. I'm gonna move.
Okay.
I'm gonna get back to that, but I just wanted to throw that in there while
we're not
talking.
Following the plan.
This is a lot of this. If you have been to any of our like we got to do a 10-week session about a community group this past fall, and it was about this, and a lot of this is very similar to it because we're kind of doing like a short, like hour-long version of it in some ways.
That's why.
Yeah. But we hope that you get some new stuff out of it too. But anyway, so just going to talk about some examples of like how aphobia operates. Aphobia, I know some people have seen it said that that's actually referring to being phobic towards people on the who are ASD, autistic spectrum. But I can promise you that actually was originally it was used as aphobia and arophobia, like as a combination phrase. And since autism since it started being referred to more as ASD rather than autism, that has kind of been less of an issue of confusion. But just in case you're wondering or have heard that before. So some examples are, of course, you get the invisibility and the erasure. A lot of times, like, we are pretty invisible, so you get the assumption, oh, well, you must be homosexual, which, again, nothing wrong with that, obviously. Why are we here? But like but it's not who you are. It's not what you're experiencing, you know? And then like when you're in these like extremely puritanical spaces, then you get like it's treated as if it's a sexual ethic, which was something we'll be talking about very shortly. Like getting assumed as the default because the lack can be like, if you don't show something that's contrary to the assumed default, then therefore you are just the default until proven otherwise, as I was saying earlier. We have the invalidation exclusion issues within LGBTQ spaces. This tends to be more of an issue. You'll run into people that actually will refer to themselves as things like ace-exclusionists. These are people that believe that being asexual or aromantic does not make you part of the LGBTQIA+ community. Generally, it's because of being considered not queer enough, because our experiences could be conflated with that of somebody who is straight or cis, depending on what kinds of intersections we have with heterosexuality or heteromanticism. But usually people that are identifying as ace is because they've noticed, or identifying as aros because they've noticed something's different. You know, like, it's not, people don't end up there just for the fun of it. Like, it just, and also it kind of just is reinforcing the cis heteronormative idea that like everybody's just default straight and default cis, which is not actually the case. Sorry, I get nervous while I'm talking, so I apologize.
You get nervous? Oh no.
I'm a shy guy.
Should we take a break?
Don't have time.
You need some water? You need a cat?
Beans won't come to me right now, so sad. Talking about belittlement, devaluation, and dismissal. Like, you tend to get a lot of watering down of what's going on. Like, well, the experiences that you're experiencing are not that bad, or they're not that real. Like, you get like a demisexuality, which is like where you're experiencing sexual attraction to people, but only after you've known them for a certain period of time. Like, for instance, I was together with Al for a number of years before I reached the point where I was like, I think I'm sexually attracted to them sometimes.
Only sometimes.
Yes. And And so I sometimes say I'm demisexual, but that's because it took years. Like we had been together for years before that happened. And that is a demisexual experience, for instance. But when you say you don't get attracted to people until you've known them for a while, then a lot of people hear, oh, well, that's just normal. Well, that's not true. You know, like a lot of people do experience sexual attraction before they've gotten to know people. And that's also okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not a bad thing. We also,
like celebrity crushes.
yeah,
That's fake, right?
sometimes when you're
It's
ace
how
is what
I,
you
as a
start
as a
thinking.
person who is ace, feel. Because like growing up in high school, people talking about like celebrity crushes or like people that they're attracted to who they have not met, that they have a parasocial relationship with. And I, in my head, I'm thinking, oh, you're just over exaggerating. You're like making that up, that like you have an attraction to this person who you don't know. Turns out I'm wrong, but it's still, there's still an aspect of it that I have such a hard time connecting to, that this is a cultural thing that people experience that I just have absolutely no perspective on.
And so that kind of thing can, like, on the other hand, you'll get people that are like, well, they'll be derisive of it, like you choose to remain single because you don't experience sexual attraction or romantic attraction. You don't want a partner for your life. And so they're like, oh, well, you know, you're just missing out. You haven't met the right person. It's not, or they'll,
I know.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I was just going to continue on if I can briefly.
Yeah, finish your thought.
The next thought was the next part. So go ahead.
Okay. I mean, that kind of attitude was what kept me from identifying as aromantic for a long time, because there was this feeling of like, oh, if I'm aromantic, that means no one will love me and I don't love other people. It's just, it was very isolating because I didn't have an understanding of within more nuance what that meant. And of course now I understand that's not the case, but like this kind of, oh, you're going to be lonely for the rest of your life sort of feeling that was associated in my brain with a lack of romantic attraction was what kept me from exploring and identifying with the experience of aromanticism. Of course, now I feel a lot more passionately, I think, about my aromantic identity than my asexual identity, but that's neither here nor there.
You'll have devaluing, like people will devalue relationships that aren't romantic or sexual. Like you can have like they'll be reduced to best friends. Like Al and I are not best friends. Like we are best friends, but we're also that's not the right phrase for what we are to each other. Like that's not that is too soft a term.
Yeah, like when we came out to my parents, one of their questions was, why can't you just be sisters in Christ? Aside from the fact that neither of us are women, which was not on the table at the time, to my parents anyway. It's this, there is an emotional intimacy that we have with one another that I think to both of us transcends the understanding of just friends. And that's the way that people talk about it, is like, well, you're just friends. Why do you need to label it as something specific? It's because it is unique.
Yeah. And you get into like, to get into the next point, harassment, stereotyping, and dehumanization. You get like jokes like, do you reproduce by mitosis? You've gotten that joke, because I've gotten that joke. Also gotten the, are you a plant? Like, okay. Well,
I mean, I am, but that's because I have SAD, not because I'm asexual.
And you'll get things like accusations that aromantic men are just men who like don't care about, like they just want to sleep around, you know. And it's like, that's not how this works at all. Like it's different from just being somebody who wants to sleep around. Like maybe they do, but that isn't related to being aromantic.
Or like you're a prude.
You're frigid, you're afraid of sex. That was what happened to me with one of my previous partners, that they were like, oh, you're just afraid of like what a sex of sex, and once I like show you how good it is, you'll be happy. Didn't end well. And also you'll get the, well, sex and romance are what make us human, which is one of the reasons why what was being said today, like desire is not necessarily sexual or romantic. So what was being said in the general session today was really powerful to me, partially because of that sense of, it's like love and romance are not what make us human. And I know this because I do not really experience much in the way of like sexual love or romantic love, but I'm still human. but I do experience a lot of desire, not necessarily in the sense of a romantic or sexual desire, but I do experience that. And I really like that. So
There are a lot of really good points, some of which we'll get to later, about like deconstructing traditional structures that in particular isolate ace and aro people.
yeah. Yeah, let's see. And then getting into the part that I'm extremely passionate about, this conflation of orientation with choices about sexual ethics, because let me tell you, this is a problem that we run into so much.
Yeah.
LGBTQ identities suffer from hypersexualization, but ace and aro identities tend to like slip under the radar as being like because we're our identities, especially when earlier in our lives when we're supposed to be single and saving ourselves for marriage or whatever else in a Puritan sexual ethic, which is nothing wrong with that if that's something you want to live. However, it is not the same as being ace or aro. And so what we end up experiencing is like, you go to youth group and they're like talking about how important it is to save yourself for marriage. You need to make sure that you're like not getting yourself into a situation where you're going to be tempted to do something that you shouldn't. And you're sitting there being like, is that difficult?
I like to describe it as the Elle Woods. What, like it's hard?
Yeah. And then you think, oh, well, you know, I've just been blessed by God with like a lack of sexual, I've been blessed with this like extremely strong, like power to avoid being sexually like drawn to do anything with anybody. No.
And then you get tall.
Yeah. And and of course, this does interact interestingly with being in purity culture. So like, I do want to we've gotten a lot of questions about this, so I'm just going to break a little bit into this, talking about the fact that, yes, the fact of the matter is that my ace and aro identity is in fact, in some ways, interacting with the fact that I grew up in a purity culture where I was told I have to keep my legs closed. And it's my responsibility to do that. And I have to be really afraid of being ever alone with a guy, because assuming that I'm a straight cis woman, and all of these things. And I thought that's what made me ace. And the thing is that probably it does have an effect on my relationship with sex. Like, that's a fact, because we're a combination of our genes and how we're raised. And our experiences, you know, all of these things are affecting us, but that doesn't make identifying yourself as ace or aro any less of a valid place to be. One thing that is really important is that validation is that like the process of finding out who you are can be long, and also it can go through multiple stages. Okay, so like you might be somebody who says, wow, I really identify with ace experience, but what if it's because of purity culture stuff? Well, you know what? You can still identify as ace, and it can be because of that. And it's part of your process of discovering who you really are, because that can be a safe space for you to go, okay, well, what do I actually feel about these things? No, it doesn't have to be your landing place, you know, and even and maybe it will be.
You get a lot of young teens who identify as asexual or aromantic because they did grow up in purity culture and they're scared and they don't understand how to engage with sexuality in a way that feels safe and healthy. That's fine. That is fine. All of our identities are part of a journey. And if someday you discover that you were not actually asexual or aromantic, that's fine. We celebrate that you were here with us and you found something to glean and feel seen in while you were here. And yep. If you do continue to have label, that's fine. The whole identity is a journey. It's not a destination.
Yeah.
So anyway.
And
just as asexuality is not a sexual ethic, it's not a way of engaging sex or sexuality. There are as many ways to be ace and aromantic as there are ways to be gay or lesbian or trans and gender expansive. It varies from person to person. There are aces who are sex workers. There are aces who have chosen to be celibate. There are so many different, there are aces who are sexually active. There are aces who are sexually repulsed. There's so many different ways to be ace. It's not asexual ethic to be ace. It's not a sexual ethic to not. I don't know if there's a romantic ethic, a relationship outlook,
Yes.
contract thing. I don't know. To be aromantic, there are aros who are in long-term partnerships, like myself and Vaughn. There are aros who are not and who don't want that. There are aros who have what they call a queer platonic partnership, which is also something different. It has been cultivated out of an absence of language for these non-sexually centric or romantically centric long-term intimate adult relationships that we just don't have words for. And it's something that we're still kind of developing the infrastructure and the space to have.
The separating the sense of like that you can be asexual without that being a reflection at all on your sex life, and you can be aromantic without it being a reflection at all on your romance life, because it is about how you experience attraction, not about anything else, can be a really important dividing point. So that way you can understand, like it might help you understand better what is it that is purity culture interacting with me, the sense that I can't or I shouldn't or I must not. Like those are things that are not about your asexual identity or your aromantic identity. Those are that can be like kinds of things that are caused by the trauma of going through purity culture growing up. So that might help you be able to separate out like what you are experiencing, what you're not experiencing. But you know, it can be all over the place. And for me, I know that there is an interaction to some degree. And I had a thought and it went right in and out of my head. So we'll have to come back to that.
All right.
But
shall we move on to the next section?
Yes.
We're good here. All right. Speaking of all of those different ways to be ace, you might think that there is no biblical affirmation for being asexual or aromantic, and you would be wrong. At least there are some passages in the Bible that Vaughn and I have found encouraging that seem to relate to an asexual or aromantic experience in trying to find aspects of queerness in the Bible. Sometimes yes.
I remembered.
Yes, Vaughn, you remembered. Okay, you should say it before you forget again.
And it's important because it's talking a little bit about the relationship between marriage. Like one of the things that is really alienating, okay, within this process, because of the conflation that's going on also, is this assumption of like you are waiting for marriage, okay? Like you are you have chosen celibacy as a lifestyle. You have chosen abstinence as a lifestyle, even though that's not really what's going on. But like the waiting until marriage in particular could be really toxic, because we have this really strong feeling that marriage is the end goal for all Christians. That is a very evangelical Puritan culture specific like thing. And that really negatively affects lots of LGBTQ Christians in different ways. But one of the ways that it affects that it has an effect on everybody that is negative, and I think especially on ace aro, is the assumption that we are all going to end up in marriages someday. They're all going to end up in partnerships that are going to be for the rest of our lives. Some of us don't want that. That is okay. And there should be space for that. And there isn't. We don't have that space. We don't have that ethic of sometimes somebody is celibate for this reason. Sometimes people just don't want to live that life. This is not the only way to be a Christian. This is not the only way to follow God.
And especially in more Protestant evangelical leaning spaces, we don't have a monastic tradition. We don't have people who choose a vocation of celibacy in the sense of like with Catholicism, you have people who will choose to be either priests or nuns or monks or other spiritual lifestyles that specifically relate to a non-family centric way of living that's more community centric. And in Protestant, especially evangelical circles, we don't have that. We don't even have the option, however narrow that option might be, to come back. There we go. There, I was out of focus for a second. So it's even more alienating because our community structures don't support that, which we'll get to in a bit. And I want to make sure we have enough time to do that. So in the sense of finding biblical affirmation for ace and aro or non-traditional family structure type spaces. There are a few passages that popped out to us that we wanted to be able to share with you. You obviously, because this was not something that really had an awareness of, it's not really addressed in the Bible. So this is us seeing queerness within these descriptions and finding affirmation there. So this may not resonate with you, and it might. Isaiah 56, 3-5, which I don't know, Vaughn, did you pull up the actual passages? Because I'm gonna have to look these up.
I did have them up, and then I closed
Then
that.
you didn't. No.
And then I closed it.
No. Okay, I'm just
Here we go. I've got Isaiah 53.
Go for it. I'll pull up the
56.
other ones.
All right, so Isaiah 56, 3-5 says, "Don't let foreigner." This is the New Living the NLT version, just the New Living Translation. "Don't let foreigners who commit themselves to the Lord say, 'The Lord will never let me be part of his people.' And don't let the eunuch say, 'I'm a dried up tree with no children and no future.' For this is what the Lord says: I will bless those eunuchs who keep my Sabbath days holy and who choose to do what pleases me and commit their lives to me. I will give them within the walls of my house a memorial and a name far greater than sons and daughters could give. For the name I give them is an everlasting one. It will never disappear."
You have this feeling of people who are not necessarily called to having a traditional family or children or marriage or whatever that might look like, which can often be the case for people who are aromantic or asexual, having this promise from God that the inheritance that I will give you will be even better than that. There's room for that in the kingdom of God. Matthew 19, 10-12 is actually like one of my favorite queer affirming passages, which might be kind of weird because I feel like this also kind of gets associated with the clobber passages sometimes. So this is obviously the conversation where the disciples are talking to Jesus about getting divorced and what divorce is. So verses 10-12, the disciples said to him, "If this is a situation between a husband and a wife, it is better not to marry." Jesus replied, "Not everyone can accept this word, but only to those whom it has been given. For there are eunuchs who were born this way, there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of God. The one who can accept this should accept this." And the way that I interpret that scripture and what I see in there is Jesus validating that not everyone is called to a married life. Not everyone has been called to be in a traditional marriage. So, and not everyone is capable of it for various reasons. Now, of course, this is getting into like again, this is not a 1-1 ratio like that eunuchs are queer people. There is a lot of parallels to a queer person's experience, but this may not, it doesn't do a very good job of communicating as like a 1-1 ratio. But there's this feeling of Jesus saying that even if you are physically incapable of being able to fulfill what many people think of as the greatest blessing or whatever, I don't know what the phrase what phrase you would say, that the kingdom of God is open for those experiences. It's not just for people who marry, it's for people who also may not, and for whatever reason that looks like. The next 3 verses I'm not going to look up and read, but they're all paraphrases of essentially the same point, where Jesus is talking to disciples about heaven. Vaughn, you got this?
Yeah.
Do it.
I'm going to read the version from Luke 20, verses 34-36. This is also from the New Living Translation. Jesus replied to this question about like, wait, if this guy marries like 7 women, who's going to be his wife in heaven? He said, marriage is for people here on earth. But in the age to come, those worthy of being raised from the dead will neither marry nor be given in marriage, and they will never die again. In this respect, they will be like angels. They are children of God and the children of the resurrection. Mm-hmm. So it's like, marriage is not the point. So it's a side trip.
Yeah, this was actually pointed out to us by a member of our community group this past season, and like both Vaughn and I were like, "That's so great! Can you like write that down for us? We need to add it to the curriculum. This is amazing. People won't be married in heaven. That's awesome." Okay, and it was such a great moment to have that happen. no, the last scripture we have is 1 Corinthians 7, which it's just the whole chapter, but I think Vaughn wants to share this one because this is kind of a funny in-joke.
Because we're running out of time, we have a lot of questions, and I want to try to get through as many of those as we can.
Yeah.
I did want to just, like, I'm just going to tell you, if you want to sit down and read a funny passage, just like if you want to read this section of the Bible with, like, bearing in mind that it's Paul, okay, he's making a suggestion, and he says this multiple times. He's like, I've not received a word from God on this. You asked me this question, I'm telling you what I think. This is just my opinion. I think I have some wisdom, but I'm not saying this is God's rules on this, okay? It is a passage about marriage, and basically, if you think about, it's funny if you think about it with Paul being an aromantic or asexual person. Obviously, there's lots of different interpretations of what Paul's sexuality and romantic life might have been like, but if you think about him as a salty ace who doesn't understand that he's asexual, he's like, why marriage? I don't understand why you'd even care about that right now. And like the entire passage is just him like, I don't get it. But I guess if you really, really want to have sex, this is the only way to do it in this respectful way to another person. So get married. Okay. It is like, if you think about it from that perspective, it gets pretty funny. Bearing in mind, again, that what he was telling people was not, oh, like you got to obey or be good to your husbands or whatever. He was actually talking a very sexually liberated thing because men were supposed to rule over wives and they were allowed to do whatever they wanted to sexually. And he was like, only have sex with your wife. And also don't deny her when she wants to have sex. And that was a very big deal, especially for the time.
So all of this to say, hopefully you've learned something, but this doesn't really make a difference unless we take active steps to try and improve the situation. So I'm going to go through this really quickly. I'm sure some of the questions were about this, but mostly this big point here. What can we do to be better? What can we do to open up our spaces to people who may have an asexual or aromantic experience? Decentralizing marriage as the end game, as the elevated, like, ultimate goal of people, because you have this issue even within LGBTQ plus spaces where the main question is, are we allowed to marry? Can we marry? Can we marry each other? And though that's an important question when it comes to queer liberation, it may not be a goal for every person who aligns themselves with an LGBTQ plus identity. That kind of goes in hand with acknowledging and supporting non-traditional family structures. A lot of our growing up in the church, when you would have small groups and whatnot, you have the kids church, then you have the youth group, you have the singles group, and then you have men's and women's, the unspoken standard being married men and married women. And then you also have nothing for seniors, nothing for people, and then nothing for people who don't have a family. Like, you eventually outgrow the singles if you're in your 30s and you're still in the singles group. It's weird because there's also the implication that you're looking for a partner, which you may or may not. And when you start thinking outside of these non-traditional family structures, then you start noticing where we have gaps, people who may be cohabiting with someone who's not their partner, or have a household of 3 people where 2 people are partnered and one is incredibly close to the other, and they've decided that they are also going to cohabit together. Adopted children, people who may be godparents, even though they're not partnered themselves. All of these very vibrant, community-focused, non-traditional family groups that the way that we've structured the church in particular has really failed to cover. I think in particular, this is true of senior care and taking care of our elder community members, because what's there for them? They're often like a back seat, and this is also stuff that will improve if we improve our focus in these ways to overall, like, a larger community perspective. So that it's celebrating non-sexual intimacy and community, celebrating the people that you have close relationships with who may or may not be your partner, but being romantically attracted to someone is not the only way to experience a deep emotional intimacy. I have a friend who I am also very close to, and I often don't have the opportunity to celebrate that friendship because it's weird. There's not like space for that. I want to get friend married to my best friend, who is not Vaughn. Like, we don't have those kinds of celebrations to just uplift other kinds of emotional intimacy. And finding reasons to celebrate that helps kind of break down these expectations of cis heteronormative culture that we've kind of had impressed upon us. Then the last point is decolonize sexuality, gender, and relationships, which can apply to decommodifying or commercializing. But I think Vaughn has
I'm going to jump in
about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, also this ties into something I did not remember to say this earlier, and I think it's really important, and I feel bad that I forgot. Like, all the things I was talking about with aphobia, like Al and I are some of the most visible, like asexual type of people. Like when you picture an asexual person, like the way that our entire community appears is white people that look like me. Okay, especially like having a somewhat usually like assumed to be woman, for instance. That kind of thing, very
White
common. Okay,
assumed female.
Yes, yeah, we're the most visible form of asexuality, and we're still very erased. How much more so, especially for like Black asexual people. You would not believe the amount of hate I see happen to people who are Black and asexual, and of course for lots of other people of different races and ethnicities as well. All of these things, intersectionality is super important, and you've got to be highly aware of that. And on that note, decolonizing sexuality, gender, and relationships, because so much of this experience comes from the corporatism and capitalism and white culture, racism being spread all over the globe. We have this very, like, nuclear families are a concept that was for marketing purposes. You get a lot of these things that are just like tied directly into white culture and selling culture, which
Western
is white culture
specifically.
Yeah. And
because you also have a lot of communities around the world that are not an individual focused society like we have here in the West. So that's a very different experience as well.
Yeah. And you have like so there's lots of, I can't even begin to address what marriage looks like in a culture that's more like communal, like it's very different from what it looks like here in an individualistic culture. And if we need to decolonize all of that, because that all changes the face of all sexualities, all genders. And I think it's a more positive and inclusive space.
Yeah.
Did briefly want to mention, Delphi made this really good point, that celibacy in religious life did have to do with finances and property. It's true, especially in the Catholic Church.
Yep.
The concept that you had to be, in order to be a priest, you had to be celibate was purely so that way you couldn't pass on your rectory to like your children. Yep. And that was it. The Catholic Church was like, we want back the land that we've given you while you're a priest, so therefore you can't have kids. Like things like that all over the place. And then afterwards, they came up with these justifications of like things that were generally just very restrictive, because most people aren't ace or asexual or like aromantic. Most people aren't, and it really hurts them. So
also, if we run out of time here, there is an Aro Ace topic. I'm happy to do like a little meetup somewhat after this so that we can get to answering all the questions, because this is a topic that Fawn and I are both super passionate about, and we both want to make sure that all of your questions get time. So like if your question doesn't get answered here, I'm going to go ahead like back into Huva and make like a Zoom session for people to come in afterwards and just talk and ask us questions. So because we're not going to get through everything, and everyone has asked such good questions that I want to try and address this as much as possible. But let's see how many of these we can touch on. One I did see that I think I can get really quickly is, could you touch on the difference between asexuality and sex repulsed? Asexuality is just a lack of sexual attraction to other people. That's it. It has to do with your perception of connecting with someone else in a sexually intimate way. Sex repulsed is whether because of any reason you are uncomfortable and turned off and somewhat disgusted by the idea of engaging in sex and sexuality and sex acts yourself. Which doesn't have anything to do with being sexually attracted to people. You can be sexually attracted to someone and still be sex repulsed, which is a weird place to be. Thinking of Kaz Brecker.
Me too. I've had this issue. Like sexual trauma caused me to be sex repulsed, so like that can, absolutely lead to that.
Yeah. But they are not the same thing. And you can be one or the other or both. There are plenty of asexuals who are sex repulsed, and there are plenty of asexuals who aren't. What are good resources for self-exploration or being aro and ace? What are places of support? What could advocacy support look like in church settings? I feel like we hit that last one a bit in terms of resources. I know the asexual visibility and exploration network. I don't remember how it is. It's a website. It's asexuality.org. I think is the primary organization for, they have a lot of exploration. They have a forum sites, which you can go and talk. And I haven't been there that often, but I know a lot of people who are asexual are.
We will have a community group.
Yes.
Again,
there is an upcoming ACE and Aro support group with QCF. I believe I saw someone mention that it was already full. However, I know that this is a community group that wants to continue, that QCF wants to continue holding as much as possible. So I believe Vaughn and another friend of ours are leading the current one. If you weren't able to sign up for this session, please continue checking back on QCF's website. I know this is a, here, there's also our contact information if you want to contact us. There's a waiting list for the community group. Okay, thank you. Someone says Angela Chen's book about asexuality is also amazing. There are, there's also Ace Awareness Week. Yes, Ace Week. I believe it's aceweek.org. Ace Week is usually in October. A Romantic Awareness Week is usually the week after Valentine's Day. So that should be upcoming. So that's a good time to try and connect with people and get resources. Someone suggests the A-OK podcast on Podbean. I am not thinking of anything off the top of my head. I know the Trevor Project tends to have good resources if you want to go on there, and they might be able to connect you to other places, but there are definitely places out there. Let's see.
I'm writing these things down so I can.
Oh, bless you.
Yeah.
As a therapist, how can I help clients explore feelings of asexuality coming from an inherent identity versus stemming from a trauma history? Vaughn, do you feel like that's something you can answer? Should I read that again?
I feel like that's a really complicated question. I think that
is.
it's definitely a matter of like, I think that
It may depend on the client.
And I was going to say, I think the number one thing that you can do is help them understand like the difference between, understand that it can be both. Like it's okay to be ace, and it's partially because of a trauma history. Like sometimes our traumas become part of us, and it ends up affecting our sexuality for a long time, maybe forever. You know what? That's okay. That doesn't make it any less of a valid sexuality. And to understand that like your sexuality can't change because of things like that, or that you need it, or that you just going to safer spaces, it's okay. And I think that can really help people feel like freed from the necessity of getting rid of their trauma in order to be able to experience their true selves. Your true self can be affected by that. So I hope that helps, like as a concept, is that it can be both.
Yeah.
And if you're helping them try to disentangle it, it's probably a matter of identifying what they're experiencing in terms of what they hear, what they think of first when these things come up, because it might come back to the trauma, but it really will depend on the client. So
it's disentangling feelings of shame from feelings from just like not having a feeling at all. It's the difference between apathy and disgust. They're two different things.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a very apt analogy, so I apologize, but this was a question that Vaughn and I were talking about a little last night because we saw it on Hoova. How do we avoid labeling people who wouldn't label themselves as ace or aro in the past, considering it wasn't an identity, but also honor the representation in the present and point out who could potentially have been? This is super interesting, and it's a great question. I know one thing I was talking to Vaughn a little bit about was using the language of ace coded or aro coded, that these persons' experiences may be paralleled with, but also holding space for understanding that not everyone may interpret their past experience with that. There's a bit of a fraught relationship there because some people find projecting asexuality or aromanticism onto people in the past invalidating of past homosexual experiences. And ultimately, we don't know who that person was in their head and what they experienced or how they would describe themselves using our language today. But I think just saying this person may fit experiences or parallel with experiences that asexual and aromantic people have today, or making it very personal, like I see this person as blah, 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 but making sure that there's still room in the language for other people to disagree or have different ideas entirely. I think that's all we have time for because we're going to run out of time. But thank you guys again so much for coming. Again, this is a topic that Bon and I are both very passionate about, and I will make the Huva thing. So hopefully anybody who still has questions or did not have their questions answered can hop in and we can talk about that, because we would both really love to. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a lovely rest of conference.
What an honor. And all of you were so great in the chat. Thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure. So
Yeah.
have a great rest of conference, everyone. Looking forward to see you around.
Bye.